not sure if we started the recording. We did. Perfect. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to start off by saying, again, thank you to Casey for trusting me and being the moderator for this event. And it's an honor and privilege to be a student moderating a professional ACM event. So thank you, Casey, for providing some guidance and support along the way in doing my first moderating panel. So with that, as she had already mentioned, today is a big day. We are exploring AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, ML, and everything that encompasses the social responsibility of corporations, the ethics, and some of the bad scenarios, the good scenarios, and just generating a perspective for everyone to consider when developing their marketing strategies. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for our forward this evening is Dr. Harsh Verma, the chair of the ACM Sacramento Chapter, Intel Software Innovator and co-founder of Glocol Networks. Dr. Verma has over 30 years of experience and has spoken at multiple technology conferences. He is the recipient of multiple awards, including the Award for Excellence for Extraordinary Contribution to Technology and the Best of California Award for IT Collaboration. So everyone, please welcome Dr. Harsh Verma.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Casey. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak here. Thank you for inviting me to present at this forum. Thanks to AMA, Sacramento Valley, particularly Casey and Gina, for inviting ACM Sacramento Chapter to organize this webinar and to bring in the topic of AI for MarTech. Very soon, we may be living and breathing AI. So AI, artificial intelligence, is intelligence demonstrated by machines, unlike the natural intelligence displayed by humans and animals. Machine learning, on the other hand, is the study of computer algorithms that self-improve automatically through experience. Machine learning is seen as a subset of AI. We already see AI in your home when you use your Amazon Alexa or your iPhone or Google or Microsoft tools. You're using some kind of AI, or what is called as a weak AI. Now, the term AI was coined first in 1956 by John McCarthy. And today, retailers are investing $5.9 billion in AI-based marketing and customer service solutions to improve their buying experiences, according to IDC. Salesforce projects that the use of AI in MarTech is growing 257% in just 2 years. That is enormous. So there are two types of AI. Historically, the procedural AI or rule-based AI systems are constructed from a set of automatic rule inferences. Today, we have data-driven AI, which can be faster and more intelligent and take better decisions based on data, and possibly more intelligent than the creators themselves. AI can have and impact society in positive and negative ways. While AI can have major impact on the economic growth and bring in vast amounts of new services and increase efficiencies in all that we do, question is, what are the ethics of AI making decisions? To just give you an example, there is the classic ethical dilemma of a self-driving car having to decide who to save, grandma or a baby on the road. The Partnership for AI, a global consortium, has created the Responsible AI for Social Empowerment. Please do check it out. So there's a lot of effort today to ensure we use AI for good. According to McKinsey, the potential for AI across various industry sectors can be as high as $11 trillion per year in 2025. But is there a dark side of AI as well? Dr. Windsurf, known as a founding father of the internet, put forward this point at the first Future World Symposium we organized at Sacramento City Hall in 2018. Do we face a utopian or dystopian future? Elon Musk said that AI can be a fundamental risk to the existence of human civilization, and he has created the concept of open AI for safe AI. As you know, he has also founded Neuralink to merge human brains with machines. So let us understand our responsibilities and take ethics strongly as per the code of ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery. As we become increasingly reliant on AI, we sometimes think, how is the data from our daily lives being captured and used? And what human biases are sublimely being introduced to us? Or what biases do we introduce when training a machine with an algorithm? Let us commit to pursue our daily lives and our business ways in ways that do not negatively impact or harm society. With this brief intro, I will hand over to Peter and the panel to talk about ethics and the social responsibility in MarTech. So Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Verma. So as Dr. Verma mentions, AI can be extremely powerful in terms of creating a utopia future or maybe even an absolute nightmare, right? So a couple of headlines here. Just to touch on a couple of things that we may or may not be aware of where AI has kind of gone wrong. Beginning with arguably the most notable example of AI bias in the COMPASS algorithm, COMPASS standing for Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions. Don't worry, I have that written down. I did not memorize that. So this algorithm has been used in U.S. court systems for sentencing purposes and to predict the likelihood that a defendant would become a recidivist or a repeat offender. Due to the data that was used, a model that was chosen in the process of creating the algorithm overall, the model predicted twice as many false positives for recidivism for Black offenders and white offenders. Of course, we can see why that is an issue and a problem. If we look back at 2015, when Amazon realized that their algorithm for hiring employees was found to be biased against women, the reason for this was that the algorithm was based on the number of resumes submitted over the last 10 years. And since most of those applicants were men, it was trained to favor men over women. And if we look at the middle there, we see that in March of this year, Facebook deleted a French town's Facebook page, the town's name being spelled B-I-T-C-H-E. So of course, we can imagine why that would happen and be cause for concern. But as we can see, in totality, AI can be biased, and it can single out groups of people not only by their race and gender, but by their socioeconomic status, culture, language, and can even exclude an entire community. So this is mostly based on the fact that the data we collect is naturally biased, and the AI ML is only enhancing these biases through its algorithms, essentially creating a quote unquote more biased representation of information. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists and jumpstart this conversation and why this occurs and how we can learn from our mistakes and promote AI for good. So I would like to introduce our first panelist being Carolyn Peer. She is the CEO and co-founder of Humaxa. Humaxa offers a machine learning powered employee engagement and performance platform that connects feedback to actions via meaningful AI conversations. Carolyn is an award-winning human capital management industry leader with a master's in instructional technology and a bachelor's in cognitive neuroscience. Please welcome Carolyn. Next, we have Brandon Middleton. Brandon hails from the south side of Chicago and has lived in the Bay Area for the last 15 years. Brandon has worked for a number of well-known Bay Area icons, including Stanford University, Silicon Valley, and Amazon Web Services. Before that, he spent most of his time in various technical and business development roles at Microsoft, Google, and Cisco Systems. And Brandon is here today to bring his unique perspective on how AI and ML has evolved within the tech industry. Please welcome Brandon. And last but not least, we have Jake Kempf. Jake is the founder and managing director of the Everyday Company. Everyday is utilizing AI and ML to transform how brands and creatives work. He previously ran a brand agency, Ampersand, for the 9 years and has over 15 years of experience helping global organizations in their positioning, management, and growth. So please welcome Jake. Now, I want to get started with the panelists, and I just want to make an announcement that during this conversation, the panelists are encouraged to build off one another's comments to keep the tone conversational. And I also want to mention that the panelists are speaking from individual perspectives, and their opinions are not reflective of their specific employers. So let's just put that out there for everybody. Perfect. So let's go ahead and get started. Brandon, I'm going to shoot over to you to get us going. I'd like to start off by looking at the landscape we're in today, and as much negative news and headlines, and some of which I've already mentioned regarding AI, AI is also still a really powerful tool that can bring positive change. I'd like to hear your thoughts on similarities and differences between corporate social responsibility and social justice.
Yeah, first, just thank you for putting this conversation together in this this panel. I feel like this is a necessary conversation that we need to have within the tech industry and kind of within the broader society as well. So yeah, I appreciate the forum. And then to the actual question, corporations have been looking for a while now to figure out, with technology advancing at such a fast clip, like what is our actual responsibility to our consumers and our customers, to the cities that we operate in, to the planet that we're on in terms of like the effects of what we're doing. And then when you look at the other side on the social justice movements that have been born recently, and then even if you look decades back in this country and in other places, there's always been kind of this presence of the haves and the have-nots, and the people who have been the gatekeepers in society have been the hoarders of the resources. And I've been encouraged by how quickly the democratization of information, powered by the internet, has leveled the access for people who are curious with an internet connection and a device. You now can have in your pocket access to all of the world's information and be able to compete in the marketplace and then the economy. So it's been interesting to observe, but I think where kind of corporations and people who live in society have a little bit of a conflict is that corporations are beholden to their shareholders, and shareholders are looking for returns on their investment. So when you look at the life of a corporation, it's based on kind of quarterly returns. And in order to get those quarterly returns, you make decisions that you think will optimize your profit and minimize your risk. Whereas on the social, like society side, we learn a lot by looking backwards at history. So understanding where the inequities have been in order to inform our present and our future choices in a way that corporations, they don't look backwards because the money's not in the past, the money's in the future. So it's been interesting to just look at the landscape that we're currently in, being both somebody that operates within the technology industry and somebody who's a father, who's a technologist, who's a Black person inside of the United States of America. So I've got all these different intersections. I grapple with this particular question every day, and I think the kind of corporate America structure is wrestling with itself right now to try to figure out just exactly what the right thing to do is, and how history kind of will look at each individual company who makes up this technology industry, because everything's digitized now. So the decisions that are being made will be here now, and then they'll be here in the future for our children to look backwards at and to say, great job, I applaud that, or, boo, that was a horrible decision. And now I am the, example of what not to do in, a business study or a business school case study or something like that. So I'll pause my comments there, but that's a little bit of my thoughts on that particular question.
Brandon, if I can capitalize on that, you mentioned something I think is inherent to all this, which is that democratization of this type of platform. And I know we've talked a little bit about it in the past, but there's a larger paradox to explore specifically with marketing. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And one of the biggest factors that we want to look at and kind of bringing this to the DEI space, if you will, if we look at that data-based model for AI, right, that model is going to be inherently improved as we diversify the data sets that are brought in. But that means that we have to create a more equitable environment to democratize the access to these platforms, right? And as I think as business people, when we look at what you nailed, which is at the end of the day, the businesses are still in business, right? They are generating a profit. As marketers, right, as this group represents, the paradox is you are trying to profile people. That's what you're doing. You're targeting individual populations, communities, down to CDP levels now that are individual consumer profiles, right? So how do you, I mean, there's a paradox out there that I'm going to ask back, maybe Carolyn or Brandon, you guys can touch on this, but we struggle with this every day. Is how do we walk the fine line of that paradox where we're trying to sell products for big brands, right? That's where we make our money, but at the same time, have that mission-driven organization that says, okay, this is as far as we're going to go, or we need to make sure that we include other sets of data, and we need to balance this on top of our general purview. Carolyn, Brandon, what do you guys think about that?
You want to go, Brandon, or you want me to?
Mama said ladies first, so go ahead and get started at it.
Okay. It's kind of funny. When Humaxa was founded, one of the things we looked at initially was taking historical data and using that data to predict what people needed, because we're not a marketing company. We're a human capital company trying to help organizations maximize simultaneously their most expensive and most valuable thing they have, their people, right? So we originally were planning to look at historical data and make predictions about what people needed to thrive at work. And it was completely through this mindset of AI for good. So if our algorithms were able to predict, Carolyn has been stuck in the same job role for 10 years. She's probably either completely burned out or looking for a new job or completely disengaged, this kind of looking at this historical data. And we actually ended up, it was right around the time of Cambridge Analytica. And we just took this enormous step back and said, we're not going to look at these historical data sets. Instead, we're going to look entirely at this generated conversation that people have with our AI assistant, rather than looking at all this other data. So the predictions, you could argue, aren't as good because we're not looking at all the data, but it just felt right. And it didn't, build biases into the predictions themselves. So, you could argue it either way. Oh, our algorithms are not as strong and not as predictive because we don't use all this historical data, but we do it in a way that's completely above water. If you are talking to our AI assistant, it's because you need help. It's because you have something important to say. All the conversations are anonymous and action can happen immediately. And building that trust to us was the most important thing. So that's how we tackled it. But I think each situation is going to be different based on what the data is and what you're trying to do with it.
Yeah. I'll add to that each individual has a certain level of tolerance and a preference about how they want to show up in the real physical world and then also in the digital world. So I think one step in the right direction that, the state of California and other places, you've got now the opportunity to opt out of particular things that previously were just tracking you without knowing. You've got a little bit more of a say in terms of what your data is used for, and if it's not sold to people who want access to that data. So just the act of acknowledging someone's personal and digital dignity is, I think, a step in the right direction, and something that you know, if you're a marketer, who knows, maybe Carolyn doesn't want her digital profile like at all tracked and targeted, but maybe Brandon like really likes the benefit of being able to search for something on my phone, and then I get to my laptop and that same advertisement is right there and I can buy it on Amazon or like wherever. Maybe that's the coolest thing in the world to me. So, you know, people are super diverse in their opinions about everything. So I think maybe that respect and that opt-in culture versus automatically bucketing people is one thing that I've been proud to see. And hopefully we do more and more of that in our industry.
I think everyone's provided some great perspectives here on basically the privacy aspect of AI, correct? And Carolyn, I want to throw it back to you. Just can you explain a little bit further and one, introduce us to Max, and then introduce us to how Max is being used to create this privacy in everyday tough conversations for employees and in the workplace?
Sure. So at its core, what Max is an anonymous digital assistant, kind of like Alexa or Siri, where people can talk about awkward, tricky workplace topics, things like implicit bias, or people struggling on the job with their performance. They're worried about getting fired. Or maybe it's something related to their mental health. Like, I'm really struggling. As we all know, during the pandemic, when all of a sudden the world changed, there were some really stressful times and people's mental health took a big dive. That, of course, bleeds into the workplace as well. But people may not be comfortable raising their hand and saying, I'm struggling with mental health. I need help. It's a tough thing to talk about. So Max creates this safe space where you can talk about these issues anonymously and receive instant recommendations or instant actions based on what it predicts will work. So if you talk about being really stressed out at work, it might offer to introduce you to a group of people who are struggling with the same things and are brainstorming ways to combat workplace stress. Or maybe it's going to ask you if you'd like to go through some stress reduction activities. The digital assistant can actually walk you through and do that. And based on how you react, it's going to be more likely to do those things in the future or less likely. So it's constantly trying to figure out how to help people. Even though your heart is in the right place, there's also, I think, Brandon, this goes back to kind of like the opt-in, opt-out. If you choose to not talk to Max and not get any help from Max, maybe you lose out, but it is an opt-in. It is opt-in. So you don't have to talk to it. Just like you don't have to talk to, maybe a coworker that you don't like or something like that.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So it's a valuable tool in creating this privacy for employees to have these difficult conversations that they might not have otherwise. And with that, I think that we can jump back to Jason and kind of touch back on the paradox of marketing that he mentioned, and what we were talking there, and spend some time on what he discussed on how to make teams diverse, right? And being able to implement, because as Carolyn, as you mentioned, that this is a great tool as well to create diversity, right? This is giving opportunities to people that might not have felt like they had an opportunity to speak up. Yep. Or so Jake, let's go to you to talk about how it's important for the diversity of teams and the technology that use these, or the teams that use these technologies, and how that can potentially eliminate AI bias.
Yeah, I mean, broad, deep questions. So, touching on one thing that I think is about opt-in culture that I wanted to bring into this, which is we're at a point when we need to switch our brains, I think, from the if and when mindset to the how and why mindset, right? Because it's already happening, right? Pretending anything else, like it's going to not evolve and not continue to proliferate across organizations is going to disadvantage anybody with that mindset. So, with that in mind, Brandon, you had brought up a really good point about that digital kind of, well, dignity, but really being about that digital avatar. I had this discussion with my nieces the other day. They're young and they already have, I found a YouTube channel, opening up presents. I don't know what, unwrappers or something like that. But that particular niece she's a digital native. And I had to sit down with her and have a conversation as just an uncle that was curious, a little overprotective, if I'm being honest, and saying, what's going on here? Just ask her questions and just give her a chance to ask me. And she was really intelligent in how she knew how to separate her digital life from her real life. And it was this element of opt-in culture, Brandon, that I think you just nailed, that our generation specifically was kind of the case study in what not to do, where we just put everything online and devil may care attitude. And we're seeing a nice evolution. So I think on the optimistic side, I think naturally the new generation that are more digital natives are going to be more, they're going to have natural proclivities that tend towards that opt-in culture, which is great. And with that mindset and what we're doing, we founded Every Day with, a core purpose, which we call Bridge the Gap, right? And we looked at initially doing all of our, some of the insight that we automate now through this, but we were looking at who can actually use this. And at the core of it, it didn't start with being perfectly honest, it didn't start with this pure DEI initiative. That wasn't at the core. What we were measuring was who within organizations, large organizations, naturally are at a disadvantage within the workplace that need the type of insight that we can provide. And that was both professional, and then it turned cultural, and then it turned into these other aspects. So when we actually did our segmentation, we realized that the best way to bridge that gap was to democratize access to these types of tools and put it in the hands of more people, we call it the everyday person, right? And so as we look forward, and the importance of creating that is, that's at our core customer set, but that's also going to perpetuate the mission that we have, which is better training sets, better data, better usage, right? Better proliferation, ultimately, raising the tides within an organization. And, this gets philosophical, but any organization that's battling that is fighting against themselves, right? Because they're going to be fighting against that inherent bottom line. And I think that they're not, how to say this, they're mutually beneficial. The more that we create more diverse data sets, the more that we give more access, the more that we give access to more communities to have this type of platform, the better off we will all be. Now that's a little bit, I'm professing now, but maybe somebody can piggyback on what I'm saying.
No, that's totally accurate. And it's amazing kind of when you add a layer of context into, that first slide you showed, Peter, of all the different companies that have made all the different gaffes in regards to AI and ML. Some people would think, well, if you just added kind of a woman to the product team, she would have been easily able to point that out. Or if you would have just, had a French person on the dev team, they would have known that was a town in France, and maybe that wouldn't have got deleted. Or if you add a Black man or woman or a minority person that sits outside of the mainstream, maybe at launch you guys wouldn't have been looking foolish. So it's really cool to see how just not even like the representation of the United States, just one or two people on that team or in that organization or in that department could provide enough insight to make it so that a whole swath of folks aren't offended, and then a whole nother swath of folks are having to play like fire drill to try to like reverse the thing that just happened. So I'm really excited about folks who are on product teams, actually, folks who are engineers, folks who are you know, currently in school and CS programs, actually diversifying the product organizations of tech companies so that we don't miss so many of the things that we've missed maybe in this generation. And you know, there's plenty of upside in what AI and ML can offer as well. So we'll talk probably about that a little bit later. But yeah, Jake, I think all the points that you made, Carolyn, you as well, are just spot on in that particular area.
Carolyn, do you feel to add anything else, or do you think we can move on?
I completely agree with what you said, Brandon. I know at Humaxa, our team it's about as diverse as you could get. Just for everything from backgrounds to generations to, we have people with neurodiversity, people from we speak, I think, 9 different languages. I mean, we're really, really diverse. Men, women, yeah, we're all over the place. And yet we're really small. There's only 5 of us. Mm-hmm. When I talk about it, people always say, oh, you must have this huge team. I'm like, no, we just act like we have a huge team because we have so much diversity in our perspectives. So yeah, my co-founder Guillermo comes all the time and says, Carolyn, you need the millennial perspective here. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, let's talk. We would never be able to do that if we didn't have that. But I think people are starting to wake up to the need for that, and that it's not about just checking the box that, oh, now we have a more diverse team. It's like, no, there's a real value in bringing all these different perspectives to the table, and especially in a product perspective, as you mentioned, Brandon and Jake. So.
One more thing to add, Peter. The new smart person of this next generation will be the person who's humble enough to be like, yeah, I might have went to a fancy school or have had all these lived experiences, but I'm going to take the humble road and assume that I don't know, and have the humility to take extra feedback or to ask extra why questions before they launch something or before they do something. Whereas previously, if you did something before the internet, that mistake was a lot more contained. So I think the smart people of the previous generation might have come from the fanciest schools and had the most resources, but the kind of the new role models and the new wise people and the new smart folks will be the one to kind of have this this just innate ability to turn down the volume on themselves and what they think, and be open to the community that their product or their audience is going to be aimed at in order to try to optimize for good outcomes there. So you want to take that one on a tangent, but that, Carolyn, your statement made me think of that.
I got to piggyback on this. This is a great thread because Brandon, you just nailed, I think, one of the most important characteristics that anybody can have, right? Which is sit back, ask questions, and listen, right? And especially when you're involved in places, communities, technologies that you don't understand. It's okay, but presenting a place where people can accept and be comfortable with not understanding and learning is so important. And I think, tying it back to AI and ML for the team is, dispelling what Dr. Verma kind of explained in the beginning, right? With the differences of AI and ML and what they're doing is, these are really optimizing what we already do. These are human intelligence optimization, right? And there is an opportunity for, Brandon, exactly what you said, to help assist us in just asking those questions and learning. And anyways, very good point, Brandon. Yeah, want to second that. So.
Yeah, and I think that leads perfectly into our next question, which I would ask all 3 of our panelists to kind of think about and answer. And Brandon, I think I'll come back to you since you kind of initiated that concept and that tangent there, and I'm just going to keep running with it. But what are some challenges that individual employees may face when trying to implement these AI ML technologies ethically within their corporations? And then like, how can employees hold their companies accountable when they're trying to do these things? So as you mentioned, like thinking outside of the box, being able to humble themselves, but then they're trying to come up with these ideas to, as you mentioned, an old school kind of class of elitist, I guess you might say, and how do they maneuver that within their corporations and moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question and a big one, right? Like if you work at a big tech company, there is diversity there in age, in the way they, different people think about themselves, the way that different departments think about themselves. So, you could be in an engineering-led company, you can be in a sales-led company. So there's all these different dynamics all the time. And one thing early in my career that I kicked myself for doing was leaving most of myself outside of like my technical prowess at home. So like, leave the fact that you were born in Chicago and grew up in a particular culture at home, leave kind of your love for music and, volunteerism at home, just like focus on doing your job. So I think the older I get and the more experience in the tech industry and in academia that I have, the more apparent it is that kind of all of those intersections that every single person has is the context that'll help corporations as nothing but like a group of people that are aimed at doing something cool for customers that'll make money. Like that kind of thing will force conversations about what the right thing is to do for the company, and then what the right thing is to do for customers and for partners and everybody that play in that ecosystem. So again, like learn from me to not keep like those other parts of yourself back. Feel free to, it may be a little risky to be vulnerable initially, but I've gotten so many comments over the last just 2 years, 3 years since I made the decision to be okay bringing like my children or my whole life, community, neighborhood, like everything into conversations to raise points that other people wouldn't have thought about because they're, raised in a different culture or don't have the same kind of viewpoints that I do. So I don't have the full answer to that question, Peter, but I think a step towards the answer is to just get comfortable, approaching kind of a boundary, cultural boundary, ethnic boundary, something where you can get two different sides together and have an open, like respectful, dignified discourse and process behind how decision-making is done that's transparent for people who don't agree with it, but then understand, oh, we went through these steps and these mechanisms in order to get there. And that's part of our company culture. So you might not like it, or you might be on the other side of the fence about this decision, but there's no like opaqueness or ambiguity about how we got there. So those are a couple thoughts. I'm sorry, it's not the answer, but maybe a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Jake.
Yeah. I'll piggyback on that because I think the idea of culture within your organization, I think, is a big one that's coming up more and more. We believe, and I believe personally, heavily in gray areas, right? I think that everybody needs to get a little bit more used to. I think with the questions that you brought up, Brandon, is another good point, is get used to a little bit of uncertainty, because that's kind of where the beauty lies, right? Naturally, call it AI, right? Call it the BuzzFeedification, the YouTubeification of the world, where we think that there's one clean answer to everything. There's really not, right? There's never going to be. And that's kind of the beauty of it. And so we, when it comes to culture, always battle that idea of, what's the old boys club, right? And that idea of like the elitist idea. Well, let's make sure we don't replace one version of it for another, right? And create a different kind of the same problem. And with that, I think comes down to, Brandon, just to support your point again, it comes down to creating an environment where people can actually be themselves, and that they can ask those questions, that they can bring in those influences. Now, for us, trying to bring this home rather than just, you know, promoting Brandon and his ideas all the time, but bringing it back to what we're doing, we're trying to create more of a tool than just that pure solution. Everybody's driven towards solution orientation, but like look at it as a, you know, a shovel. Anybody can pick up a shovel. It's for them to decide what they dig, what they build, what they do. And I think as far as cultures go in the future, that's going to be an inherent part of it, which is be comfortable that not everybody's the same, and take advantage of that. Find those overlaps between communities, right? Where there's difference, where there's pushback, because that pushback, if it's harnessed, is where that magic happens, right? It's where the innovation occurs. It's where the new conversations occur. And those are the parts of culture that I think that, you know, the Gladwellian aspects that we all want the world to be, we need to separate from. And we need to get back to how do we create that kind of uncomfortable but beneficial conversation, dialogue, whatever you want to call it. So again, Peter, sorry, I don't know if that really answered it and we're getting cultural, but I think that's the best thing we can do, because then the application of the tool is going to be better off.
So
I
if
think you guys
can-
are really driving in on the point, though. The overall point of, you know, ethically implementing AI ML techniques, right? So like the ethically doing it is by becoming more diverse, sharing your culture, bringing it to work, and then being able to stem those ideas within your group in subsets and on the product line, right? And Carolyn, I think you can touch even more on this. So I'll go ahead and let you do that.
Sure. I was just going to bring up, you guys were talking and a couple of recent examples popped up in my head. These are actually real life examples. We don't have access to any of our clients' data, but the system was designed to send out alerts when people have a conversation with our assistant Max that are concerning. And one of them that came up recently was so an employee was talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I believe the assistant had asked them, like, hey, how do you feel like we're doing with this? And the person had in the conversation said, well, you know, we're doing pretty well, but there's a big problem. We've got a dude wall. And so it registered that as a concerning comment and sent an alert. Even though it was anonymous, it sent an alert to the leadership of the organization, say, take a look, this may be concerning. And so then the assistant facilitated this live anonymous conversation between the person who said that and the leadership of the organization, even though neither person knew who it was. And the person who was reading it was like, well, what's a dude wall? What is that? And I don't know if you guys have heard this term, or it's like this, like if there's a company headquarters and sometimes in the history of a company, it'll show like all the former CEOs or the former presidents. And it's like, well, they had this and it was all men. And so the person was like, you know, we need to like bring, you know, there has to be some, you know, some other more than just men, other women and other, you know, diverse groups who have also contributed. Maybe they weren't the CEO. Hopefully there will be, or there would be, but, you know, this concept, and it generated this complete conversation around something that was really awkward to talk about. And ultimately, because I think the leadership of the organization was listening and did want to make a change. And so now they're thinking about how can we bring a more diverse people who have contributed to the history of this company, even if they weren't necessarily the CEO, they may have contributed even more. And just the generation of that whole thing, being able to talk about these things in an anonymous way were possible really through this AI assistant, which of course goes back to the whole concept of AI for good. So sometimes it's nice to see that there actually is progress being made in that regard.
No, absolutely. And sticking on that point, I think we can shift gears here and really highlight the benefits of AI and ML, right? So let's go ahead and continue on this thread, and I'll make the rotation and I'll go back to Brandon here, and I'll ask you the question, how can AI and ML help companies incorporate social responsibility into their brand? And if you have any case studies or corporate partnerships where they've leveraged AI or anything like that in discussions of underprivileged youth or digital inclusion or anything, please share your thoughts.
Yeah, sure thing. And I have to thank Carolyn for defining dude wall, because the picture that went up in my mind was like a wall of dudes, and it was
all dudes, yes.
So thanks for clarifying. But to your question, Peter, one of the things that I think has been cool to see in the field of kind of AI and ML is we talked about the democratization and kind of leveling the playing field, that the internet brought us. But then the idea that only data scientists or only technical people could use cutting edge technology and apply it in their daily lives. I think AI and ML can lower kind of the barrier to entry for people who have ideas to be able to execute on those ideas, or people who have different learning styles or disabilities to be able to participate in conversations and in things that they were not able to participate in previously. So I think that's one of the things I'm excited about by kind of where AI and ML is going. And to the question about just examples and case studies, if per one of my previous examples, Carolyn is the type of person who doesn't want to be tracked all around the internet and wants to kind of protect her children's identity as they search for different things and don't want, their 9-year-old and 5-year-old being targeted and retargeted as they're watching YouTube unwrapping videos. I found out, about a company called Neeva, NEEVA, that's got it's a private, privacy first, consumer over advertiser kind of search engine. There's other alternatives like DuckDuckGo or other ones where, we want to kind of put the consumer over the kind of dollars that the advertisers want from being able to target and retarget those consumers. So that's one example of a product that I've been beta testing and I'm pretty pleased by in the last couple of months here. You mentioned the open AI initiatives and just making the technology available for everybody. There are plenty of organizations that are trying to teach kind of communities of color and kind of folks that sit outside of the mainstream, the 101, 201 level information, just so that they can claim more agency and feel like when you walk outside of your house, there's so much data coming off of us all the time, our location, everything. And lots of people feel like life is happening to them and not, them impacting the situations that they walk into and the spaces that they're parts of. So I think AI and ML, when used responsibly, can give, again, that dignity and that agency back to people so that they don't feel so much they're at the whim and the will of Big Brother every time that they step outside. And we're finding our balance and our way, but I think there's a bunch of mission-driven types of companies who are doing bold things, who are putting kind of the power back into the hands of the consumer versus just doing the freemium version of something and knowing that later they can sell all that data or that metadata to advertisers who will target, retarget, and maybe not do the best thing for the consumers of that particularly free product. So those are a couple of thoughts there. Again, maybe not the answer, but definitely a couple of steps in the right direction.
Brandon, I think you nailed it though. You talk about agency, right? And the provision of that for people and how that affects, I mean, let's getting into the deep philosophy of it. This is about the long-term benefit of all people, right? Of our society. Like that's what we're building towards. And that starts with creating agency, and that starts with education, right? You nailed it at first. There are people in this world with different learning styles. We talk about them as outliers. We talk them, we glorify the dropout that end up pursuing their passion and made it big. Well, sometimes that's just because they didn't find fit in the environments that they were. And we can extrapolate that across any type of culture, age, gender, etc. And by creating an environment that teaches people, that educates them on the potential of this tool and puts it into their hand, that's where that agency is going to be created. Now, as marketers dealing with AI and how that's going to move forward, well, we're in the business, right? If we're dealing with it, if you're at a company that is applying it, if you're utilizing it to your advantage, right? Then it is your kind of individual obligation to say, how and why. Right? How am I going to use this and for what reason? And it comes back to asking those questions. So I think in the practical sense, right, to relate it back to what we're doing is, getting down to that way of learning, Brandon, that you had mentioned. I'm the first one. I was exactly that person. I went to math and science schools and all that, but I'm not a formulaic person. I'm a kinesthetic person. I need things visually in my hand. I need to touch them tactily. And growing up, that was not the case. As soon as I got into an environment where I was around professors that were like, we're all about that three-dimensional thing, I thrived. Yep. I was like, wait, there's a whole different way of education. Why didn't I have this when I was 6, 8, 12, like go back to blocks, that would help. And just for myself, it's like, that's actually one of the applications we're building into our system, is how do we start with that visual first idea so we can apply ourselves to those, in our cases, to the brand and creative professionals, and provide them a tool where they don't have to be a data scientist to access and to take advantage of these tools that so many people in these other sectors have. And that's one level of it, but that really, I think, self-perpetuates this very idea, is we need to put the tools into the hands of communities that don't naturally have them or don't already have that access. But we also need to be, as individuals, as professionals, as organizations, as community members, we need to proactively go out there and actually try to educate people and teach them how to use that. And that's where I think the organizational, especially the organizational factor in being marketers, comes in, which is you're going to utilize this to target people. At the end of the day, we're marketers, we're selling a product, right? So with that in mind, when you're involved in the organizations and you're taking advantage of new assets, new tools to help that, how do you make sure that your team and that your organization are building that around the right infrastructure and thought process? And how do you bring people in to help educate them, right? So larger issue, but I think it's getting back to that context.
And Carolyn, we'll jump that over to you as well if you had anything else to add.
One of the things that occurred to me while you were both talking, Jake and Brandon, is the concept of explainable AI and the black box theory. And I know I come across a lot of people that I talk to who are scared of AI. Like, it's a scare. Maybe, I'm probably one of them. I watch too many science fiction movies, and where AI is taking over the world, machines are taking over the world. They're coming for our jobs. They're coming for this. They're coming for that. So I think there's this sort of pre-built, for some people, they're just scared. And as powerful as unexplainable AI is or can be, I kind of feel like as a society, by paving the road through transparency in how the AI algorithms work, can actually really benefit everybody who works in this field, whether you're in marketing or like us, we're in human capital, or, you know, any kind of science, math, whatever it is. I think having the AI be at some level explainable is a good way to get into that mindset of it's not necessarily scary. And yes, AI can do some really, really good, powerful things. And then once we get the ethics, we get the privacy down, then, you know, maybe tap into some of those really powerful, non-explainable AI. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I feel like we need to do the due diligence for everybody who's using the products themselves to understand what's going on behind the curtain. So it's not so scary, and because it can really help people and help society and do some really great things, but it's also very powerful. So we also have to be careful. I hope that helps.
Back on that, Carolyn, because I think you brought up a really good point, and that's dispelling the myth of AI, right? What's the famous AI bot from that Space Odyssey 2000?
HAL 9000.
Yeah, HAL, yeah, exactly. So I think that's the image that people naturally have in their head, that and like iRobot and a couple of these things, right? This dangerous replacement of human agency, right? That comes in and nefarious things happen.
Right.
But in reality, is marketers especially, I think the best way, and this is, you know, from smart people explained to me, so as a conduit, right, is AI is at its most basic is just automating your natural learning processes. That's all that it's really doing. So if you take a discovery process, a research process, some sort of processing of information, AI is just automating it. And it can automate that at speed, and that self-learning capability is where it exponentially grows. But at its basic A to B standpoint, it's just automating a process. And so when you get into that as professionals and you look at the future of where it's going to go, just look at it as, okay, well, what are the processes that I can kind of optimize, right? Quicken, whatever, hasten, and replace that part of that human touch with that human creativity and that agency. So you can actually improve upon the processes that you do have. In that way, I think it can be absolutely beneficial.
Yep. Let me add that it's apparent to me, like as AI and ML starts to automate a bunch of the processes that humans manually do today, it'll start to force the question about the things that AI and ML won't be able to like establish, like what is justice? What does it mean to like reckon with inequity? What does, you know, something in this country, like in the news was like reparations for slaves, for example. Like if you put AI up against the history of the United States of America and ask, what is the appropriate response to this particular kind of chain of events, it won't be able to tell you. So I'm curious to see what humans do when there's so much time that we freed up for ourselves that we actually have to like face each other and ask ourselves the questions that the corporations don't care about because it's looking backwards, but then it's going to influence what we do in the present and like how we are remembered by our children and the generations to come. So it's an interesting thing to ponder, and is one of the cool things about ethics. Like it's literally asking the questions that today and right now, like AI and ML are not able to really delve into, because it's about the soul, it's about morality, it's about justice. And when you look at diverse audiences and you ask simple questions, you might get different answers, and it'll just make AI, it'll make little Hal's brain explode. So we're gonna have to figure some of this stuff out and get to, you know, get to a round table and start asking for lots and lots of different people's opinions in order to make progress. So I'm excited, and I'm also a little bit tense about, okay, how are those conversations going to go? Are people going to be like emotionally ready? Are they going to be willing to, like, we're also talking about power, right? Who's just going to up and give all the resources that they have and have accumulated, all the privileges that they have and have accumulated by their own work or by just historically being passed down. Like, it's going to be interesting. So yeah, buckle up your seatbelts. It should be a good one.
Perfect. Well, you guys have made some amazing points, suggestions, insights, created a great perspective. And I think that if we can just do, I know, Brandon, I think that that was kind of like a really good sign off on what your perspectives are towards marketing and AI and ML towards the future. But if Jake and Carolyn, if you guys can provide just a overall blank statement, what should marketers and people in this audience consider when using or initiating AI ML technologies in their marketing strategies in the future?
Carolyn, I'm letting you start.
Sure. Okay. I would say that it's okay to make mistakes when you're experimenting with ML and AI. Maybe this is radical, but I think part of the learning process of what feels right, what feels ethical, is a part of making mistakes as well. For example, if you use data that is inherently biased, and you realize the outcomes, and you look at it from a ethical standpoint, and it just doesn't feel right. I mean, you talk about morality. It's, that's a learning process. It's okay to make mistakes and realize that's part of the learning process and figuring out how AI can be used for good and not for nefarious purposes. I think the number one takeaway that I would say. It's okay to make mistakes, learn from it.
I couldn't agree more. I would add 2 points that I just noted down listening to you, Carolyn, is ask questions. Brandon, you brought this up earlier too. Ask where your data came from. Ask what the set is. Ask your team if this is representative of who you're going after. Don't be afraid to do your job, right? If you're selling shoes to teenagers, right, then you're going to sell shoes to teenagers. You're not going to replace that. But ask the questions that make sure it's being done in the right way, right? And that you are being representative. And the other one is, remember that it's augmentation, not replacement. At the end of the day, you're a professional. You have your own capital. You're bringing that value. This is ultimately a tool that's going to augment your work, your team's work, your organization's work. So I think at all times, I think that brings it back, to the larger scope of dignity, right, that we brought up, is make sure that you realize that all of these technologies are not replacing or should not replace you and those questions that you need to ask yourself. They should be building upon that, who you want to be, where you want to take it, the organization that you want to be involved in. So however you apply any tool, you have to do that with your agency, understanding your dignity and utilizing it to your benefit, right? So.
Brandon, any last words?
Just thank you for everybody that's on. Hopefully kind of this conversation taught you something or gave a perspective or a context that you didn't have before. I'd say my takeaway is that comment I made about kind of the smart people from before, and then like the wise and the smart people from here moving forward. I think humility and being able to acknowledge that if you think you know anything, you know that you know nothing at all. Like, you need to stop, acknowledge that I've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And to really like lean into it. It's so fascinating to put on the eternal kind of student cap. When you acknowledge that you don't know everything, the world becomes more interesting because you can learn about all the stuff that you just acknowledged that you don't know about, And I find a lot of joy in interacting with people that come from different backgrounds. And I find like the richest, most meaningful conversations and the meaningful relationships I have are from people that are like the most different from me, and that, just we initially didn't speak the same language, and then we had enough interactions together for us to learn each other, and now we're like the best of friends. So I would say just be humble, be curious, and like we say at my current employer, go out there and work hard, have fun, and make history.
I love that. Well, I think that brings us to conclusion here this evening. Thank you so much to the panelists for your time today. I think this is a very valuable session, a lot of information to take away, to think about, to consider, to implement, not to implement. There's so much to run with here, and it actually runs into a part 2 of this series that we're doing with the ACM and the AMA Sacramento Valley chapter. And the next part of this will be sometime in August, where we'll be doing another panel discussion talking about the futuristic applications of AI and ML in marketing. And then eventually that will lead into a third panel at the Future World Symposium, which is an annual nonprofit event that the ACM Sacramento Chapter hosts virtually October 7th and 8th. So thank you so much for participating. Thank you everyone that joined us this evening to support the workshop, the series, the vision, and really bring together 2 nonprofit organizations trying to do good by our communities and by everyone else related to our field. So with that, I think that we'll open it up to the floor for any questions you would like to ask the panelists. Please feel free to unmute yourself to ask and discuss. This is an open conversation. If we want to dig any deeper into any of these questions or anything like that, please feel free to do that now. If not, you can also ask in the chat. I'm not sure, Casey, do we have any questions in the chat during the session?
I have not seen questions specifically, more just kind of reflections as the conversation was evolving.
Okay.
I'd be interested if I can ask something to the audience and to the people joining us, maybe, is as marketers or whatever your profession may be, is there a specific topic at hand that that you're battling with right now and that you're considering applying AI to?
We'll give folks a minute to add thoughts in the chat, or if you'd like to jump on, feel free to unmute or turn webcam on if you're able to as well. I think for me, if I can jump in, one of the interesting things that I'm noticing is the social media algorithms that kind of aid in discovery of new brands and products and services. And I was surprised to find, as we were doing some of the preliminary research for this conversation, just the magnitude of bias and how that can impact our marketing strategies and even where we as a brand appear in those recommendations. So I found that really interesting as we were going through this as well.
I'll bring up one quick topic too. So I do marketing in mainly agriculture, and there's a significant amount of AI happening in agriculture. With the products and breeding, and one thing comes to mind, there's an actual machine you can put out in the field that'll pick weeds for you, and it learns what a weed is, and it learns what's a weed versus not a weed, and it'll go through, and there's ones that zap them with lasers, and there's ones that hand pick them. So AI is just everywhere. You don't even imagine some of the places that it is, and you're like, wow, I'm out in the middle of nowhere in a bean field or something, tomato field, and there's AI just all around you. It's just incredible. So it's going to be interesting for me in my profession, learning how AI kind of affects the industry that I'm in, and then how it affects the marketing aspect of that as well.
Mark, I think you nailed a really good point, which is, we're talking about the delivery of a message, not even the application of a tool, right? Of that end tool. I saw, I don't know if it was targeted at me or a news article of a French fry flipper. It was like called Mr. Flipper or something.
Yeah.
I don't it was a big robot arm for a little basket, which made it seem maybe not cost benefit appropriate, but it's going to be interesting how that really changes the application. But we talked about this in one of our preliminary discussions, right? About the fear around, the manufacturing sector, specifically Detroit and the auto manufacturers. And now we're looking at, okay, is there a way that we can improve the quality of the workforce and not just replace them, but get them to do more of those creative aspects?
In the workforce is probably the main reason for this type of application where I'm at is, the population of people who are willing and able to work in the fields is adjusting and changing because of many, many reasons, and including AI and some of this stuff is just important to help kind of bolster up that labor market behind us when you're, harvesting vegetables and fruits. It's just very important. It's going to be more and more important, as we continue down this path.
Yeah, something super funny that I found just recently. Let me see if this works. I don't think I can share screen, but
I'll get you 1 second.
Classification is, a big challenge, like image classification, right? So within AI and ML, my colleague showed me this earlier today. And if you ever think we've arrived,
Oh,
never like and like we've got a long way to go in order to like fully figure out the world, and stuff like this makes me laugh all the time.
Chihuahua or muffin.
That's awesome.
So I have people sending me stuff from all over like my work life, but like whatever you're doing, make sure you're also laughing and trying to build bonds with your teammates and your community at all costs. So I would share this current thing that is making models and AI algorithms go crazy right now.
Too funny. We do have one question in the chat from Ishan. For the data collection process, what are some good guidelines or rules of thumb in determining whether the data set is ethical? Jake, I think you were the one who was talking about bringing forward questions, right? Our responsibility as marketers to talk about where the data is coming from. Is this representative? Maybe you can weigh in on this question.
Yeah, I think there's multiple tiers to it. So, first and foremost, it's what Brandon nailed about optimal, right? Are people giving you permission when you're collecting that type of ancillary data? I think on another level, it's going to be what is the application and how much access do you provide others with, right? So, are you collecting broad form data? And then if you're providing it to a company, is it crossing a particular boundary that you wouldn't want to have crossed yourself? And that's not a very good rule of thumb for a business, but I think it gets down to that, that age-old moral dilemma question of, if you told your dad what you were doing or your mom what you were doing, would she be disappointed in you? Right. And it's kind of down.
The mom test.
The mom test. Well, yeah, like the relative test. Like, would
right.
At the end of the day, if you told them, and that comes with its own gray area, right? But I think first and foremost, if it's deep level understanding, did they opt in? Do you have access to this, right? And number two, it's going to be once you do have access or you do collect publicly facing information, wherever that's from, what are you providing to others? So might be vague, but.
Carolyn, any learnings or kind of as you reflect on the development of Max at Humaxa, how did you go through that process as you were looking at data sets and ethical considerations?
Well, I kind of already touched on this, but the biggest one that we were sort of grappling with is, should we allow Max to read existing conversations between people, like person to person? And I think, at least in the United States, most organizations reserve the right to, for example, monitor email, monitor chat, that sort of thing. Legally, it's there. Ethically, it could have also been partly time, but we just took a giant step back from all that and just said, we're not going to do it. At least not right now. If you have a conversation with Max, Max is very clear that it's not a person. There's no ambiguity. It makes fun of itself. Hey, I'm just a bot. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. It tells kind of, bad jokes sometimes. It's like, I'm just a bot. There's definitely no ambiguity there. If you talk to it, it's going to read what you say, and it's going to try to predict what would make a difference for each individual in that particular moment in time, in that situation. We just decided to err completely on the side of not doing that. Now, it sometimes comes back to bite us. We'll have a potential client who's interested, and they're like, well, what, you don't read the conversations? No, we don't right now. They want us to, and we don't do it. So, was it the right thing to do? I think at the time it was. Even if it's for good, if people start feeling like it's creepy, then, they're just going to opt out. And, that's even worse, perhaps, because then we're not helping anyone.
I think that's super interesting. As a qualitative researcher, we've been talking about, how can chatbots sort of evolve the market research landscape, and would someone tell their true feelings to a chatbot? But it sounds like in your instance, having that almost anonymity or that artificial intelligence as that soundboard, it almost gives people a safe place to put their true feelings out there.
Yeah, a lot of the research that we did before developing anything related to Humaxa was around people that were coming back from in the military who were suffering from PTSD. They did some studies out of USC looking at how willing people were to talk with a machine versus talking to a person, even if the person didn't know who you were. And the studies were pretty definitive around people were more likely to open up and share authentically when they didn't feel judged. And if it's just a computer algorithm who's listening and trying to take action, that it's literally just ones and zeros. There's no judgment at all. And and then there was another study that was done, I believe, out of the University of London, having to do with medical pre-diagnosis, like how willing would people be to open up and share maybe, I don't know, embarrassing symptoms or symptoms it was hard to talk about with a person, even a doctor who that's their job, right? It was a way to kind of get people in the door. And so, it sounds kind of odd, but also it's lining up with what we're seeing as well.
It's a really interesting point, and kind of the word trust is like rising up in my brain. And the reason that humans like conversing with each other, so much is that, you build a connection and you build the trust with a friend, and it's no big deal to confide in them a certain thing. And that your secret is safe, or that there's no retribution, or that there's this like psychologically safe bubble that has been built. So it's been interesting to observe people's, use of AI technologies, voice technologies to retrieve kind of stuff that they want, and they listen to it. Okay, that's my answer. So I'm curious about kind of the future of trust and what kinds of things humans will be comfortable with before they start to take, what's inside of them emotionally and start to like give it out for free. So this world is full of examples of retribution and like, so, the other side. So I think we have to play a little bit of catch up to get back to neutral, honestly. But yeah, the future is bright. It'll be interesting to participate in and interesting to watch.
I love the links too that you shared about kind of the international landscape too, what's going on in Europe. So we'll make sure to share those with our audience as well. Wonderful. Go ahead, Jake.
No, I was going to say they're to the share articles, and I wanted to touch a little bit on what you said as well. To the shared articles, there's large scale, geopolitical discussions going on right now. You look at that political landscape that exists beyond what's just in headlines and the negotiations that are going on across different platforms that are proliferating, human tracking CCTVs, right, from Europe to China to everywhere around the globe, right? And these large policies are starting to make their way in to establish these elements, establish these practices. Now, I always have to go back to that not if, when, but how, why, right? It is coming to terms with the fact that now that we can automate this will be utilized in every practical aspect that it can be. Does it reach a point of nuclear proliferation and that type of level? I don't know if we'll get there, but there is just a matter of context that we have to understand, which is every military in the world, every government in the world will absolutely utilize this. Right? That's just a matter of fact. So, as we look into the training, into the use, into how we kind of go there, it's more of a, okay, let's do this. Let's be at, let's hold the tool in our hands and let's figure out how we can use it and how we can make sure that it's good. So anyways, there's a couple of articles I'll try to share in a second.
Terrific. Thank you. And for those that are attending this, we will also circulate those through our social media channels and in our thank you email as well. So I want to thank you all again for participating in this conversation. It's been wonderful to hear your perspectives. Peter, thank you so much for hosting this conversation. Again, looking forward to that next conversation. I think we're looking at late August for talking about where do we go from here. Now that we've defined ethics and social considerations behind these technologies, what does the future of this space look like? So keep your eyes out for email announcements and social announcements about the next step there, and also Future World Symposium that ACM Sacramento Chapter will be putting on October, I believe it was 7th and 8th, Peter?
Yes, ma'am. 7th and 8th.
Terrific. All right. Thank you so much again, everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your evening. And thank you again, panelists.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you. Great
Bye-bye.
conversation.